What could be the climax of this story? Is it the creepy woman's screeching sound heard on that mysterious night? Or the experience in that old house that seems empty but is full of strange noises? Or is it the terrifying moment of being shoved by a mysterious force in the gloomy cemetery? Spine-chilling tales await. Subscribe now. But then the strangest thing happens. It goes over our house and then slowly faded away. As it goes further away, it's my right side. And second, after the screeching voice stopped, all of the dogs in our neighborhood just started howling. At the same time, I was frozen in fear and my mind just couldn't comprehend what the hell I just heard. And eventually I just kind of laid there and kind of fell back to sleep. My boyfriend never awoke from the sound, and the next morning I asked him if he actually heard anything strange during the night. And he said no, and that he slept soundly throughout the night until now. I really can't explain what I heard that night, but the fact that the dog started howling at the same time makes me confident that I actually heard something, which is really creepy. Also, for the people who are going to say, inevitably, that it was a fox. It's definitely not, because I'm from Malaysia and we don't have foxes here. It was definitely not a mountain lion too. And also, when I mention forest, it's more like a small wooded area. It's a bit of a bad description, but it's its best that I can think of. But beyond the wooded area are even more houses, so this wooded area is actually kind of surrounded by houses. I actually live in a city, and what I heard sounded nothing like all the videos that people have sent me before. Whatever it was screeching for a good 5 to 8 seconds. Just non-stop. And very clearly too, because the sound in the air just flew right over my roof, above my head. So I'm a light sleeper and the softest noises will have me up and awake. My girlfriend, experiencing her second nightmare of the night, was softly moaning. So I turned over in my bed to gently wake her up. But that's when I noticed her standing by the window that is set up near her side of the bed, facing a mirror that is on the adjacent wall. I couldn't make out any particular features besides a very distinguishable messy bun that she had worn to bed. As it was pretty dark in my room, there was not a lot of light shining through the closed blinds of the window. But I realized that something was still very off, as I would have definitely noticed if she would have gotten out of bed. I stared at what I thought to be my girlfriend, and it didn't move or make any sounds. But I could still hear the sounds of my girlfriend having a nightmare, and suddenly realized that she was actually right next to me laying in the bed. At that very terrifying realization, I said what the hell and quickly reached to turn my lamp on. But as soon as the light came on, the figure just vanished. So I turned my focus to my girlfriend, who was just waking up from her night here, calming her down and explaining what I had just saw. And now we're awake, just searching the internet and trying to think of a rational explanation besides sleep paralysis. Because I was definitely awake at the time that I spotted the figure. My girlfriend is joking that we need a blessing of the house, because, yes, it's haunted. We've both experienced strange things happening since I moved into this house last year, but it was built in 2006, so it's not that old. Also, a few months ago, she, despite being a very rational individual, also heard male voices laughing, whispering and thumping sounds coming outside of my kitchen window when I was away on a business trip, and almost called the cops that day, despite me having a state-of-the-art security system and there being no sign of anyone being in the house with her, besides my dog, who was asleep at her feet. I've also experienced finding doors open in my home that I know for an absolute fact that I had shut before. My house just doesn't feel organized unless all the doors are shut. So this was pretty unsettling to me. My fire alarm went off as well one beep, despite there being no fire and having new batteries. I don't know. Do you guys have any ideas about what might be going on? We're both mind believers of the paranormal, but wanted to find a rational explanation as to what these experiences were, and especially curious as to what the figure by my window could have been. Does this mean that I have two girlfriends now? I'm actually going to a church tomorrow too, and I'm going to ask a priest if they can bless my house. I hung the cross next to my window too, where I saw standing but thinking more and more about everything. My dog was actually ranged most of that night, My girlfriend's puppy is still in training, so we have her puppy in a crate and my dog was sleeping in the hallway. Oh, and when I drive home from dinner, I remember that I had other experiences like this when I was a little kid. A brief overview. But I woke up in the middle of the night and got out of bed to use the bathroom. I stopped in my doorway and looked to my left and my sister was in a doorway and my dad came sprinting around the corner. I got pushed back into my room by this thing and I saw it run downstairs. A few months after that I was visiting family in Ohio and we went for a walk. I was just kind of straggling behind and I looked over my shoulder and on the top of the hill I saw the same thing. It had the silhouette of a human, but there was just absolutely no color to it. It was completely solid black, and last night was the first time that I've seen this thing since I was a kid. My mom's side of the family used to have a small cabin in the woods in the Bono Mountains, surrounded by trees, but it wasn't like a fancy cabin or anything with a hot tub. More like a very small hunting cabin built by my grandfather and my uncles as well. We had a small porch with a picnic bench, a gravel lot to park in and there maybe 15 feet away, a nice size fire up here with a bench and a few logs around it. The driveway was a very long drive up the side of a mountain off a very secluded highway. The house was small, but the land they owned was pretty big. We had a neighbor too, but he was maybe half a mile away, maybe a bit closer. I'm not too sure, but we couldn't see them through the woods and rarely heard them, except for maybe some gunshots during hunting season. You could hear the occasional car on the highway, but otherwise the house was just kind of in the middle of nowhere. So we used to always spend time up there when we were younger, with all of our cousins. However, just me and my family would go up every once in a while in the summer too. We would go hiking and visit the local amusement park and at big bonfires and roast marshmallows and cook burgers. And at night we would walk further down the driveway towards the highway where the trees weren't as close together, so we could see the stars, and without all that light pollution you could seriously see just about everything. And all in all, it was just a great time anyway. So one summer, when I was maybe 13, our family of 5 took a trip up there. My family being me, my 2 older sisters, my mom and my dad. I used to be still afraid of the dark, and especially the woods in the dark. So I would really only go outside if one of my siblings or parents were with me, which they usually were. Now one night we light the bonfire and we're talking and eating marshmallows and enjoying the summer night. I was pretty tired from whatever we had done earlier in the day, so I decided to join my mom inside of the couch. I ended up falling asleep in the living room. I woke up, I can only assume, a few hours later, upset that I fell asleep and missed the rest of the fire. I pulled aside the curtains to check if anyone was still outside. From the window I can see the fire pit clearly still ablaze, and what I assume is my dad sitting on the bench by himself out there. Not wanting my dad had to be alone, I decided that I would go and join him. Now I am not lying when I say that I sincerely hate the dark. Even though the fire pit wasn't terribly far, that walk still felt long in the pitch black. I don't know what possessed me to go outside without looking for any other members of my family or even checking the time. But I opened the door and I stepped out onto the porch and called to my dad to ask why he's still there. The pit was maybe 15-20 feet away, but he would have heard in the night for sure. I can clearly see the fire pit and I can clearly see my dad, even though he was sitting on the bench on the opposite side of the fire. Confused though, I start to walk down the steps and then slowly towards the fire pit, asking my dad why he wasn't responding. As I get closer and as I keep calling for him, I realize that while I should be hearing the roar of the fire, there's just absolute and complete ringing silence. And then I notice that there's no one sitting on the bench anymore. At this point, I'm only a few feet away from the fire and the bench, but my blood immediately turned. I scolded and I whipped around and sprinted back up to the house, not daring to stop or look behind me. I locked the door and ran into my dad's bedroom, only to find him under his blankets asleep. I didn't want to wake him up to let him know how stupid I was, but I just crawled under the covers beside him and I prayed to just fall asleep. The next morning I told my parents what happened. My mom keeps telling me that it was just a dream, But I woke up from a dream on the couch right before and then went outside. When this all happened, I used to have the same reoccurring dream every time that we went up to that cabin. And I would only have that dream when I was at the cabin. I specifically remember having this very same dream again and then waking up on the couch. This same creepy dream is the same reason I always slept next to my dad anytime we stayed at the mountains too. I never felt safe sleeping by myself. That meant that my mom would share a bed with my older sister, but they both snored. So it was fine. But my dad tells me that it's just not possible because he always deadbolts the door before he goes to sleep. There was no way that I would have been able to push the deadbolt open without waking him up into, because he always puts the fire out before bed as well. Basic fire safety, which I get. All I know is that I know what I saw and I know that it wasn't a dream. And all I can hope for is that you guys also don't think that I'm crazy. I always wonder how close I was to getting murdered that day. My ex-boyfriend and I used to be co-workers. Yeah, I know. And every day after work we go to this empty parking lot 15 minutes away from what to have a smoke before he dropped me home. But we were pretty young, so we didn't really have a lot of other places to hang out. Well, we were standing outside and leaning on the driver's side of the car. It was pretty dark out and the puzzle light sort of faded away, so you couldn't see beyond a certain point. We started to get lost in our conversation and weren't paying attention to our surroundings. We came here every day and nothing unusual happened in the past. But as we were talking, we noticed a guy coming out of the dark and he was walking or jogging pretty fast. And before we had a chance to react, he was already pretty close to us and he was dressed in oversized clothes and had a backpack. I'll call him X, so everyone was silent. At first, my ex and I were pretty much frozen and were already thinking of a plan to escape in case anything happened. We didn't want to make any sudden movements. But my ex secretly slipped me the keys to his car, assuming that he wanted me to casually walk to the passenger side and get in the driver's seat so that we could leave ASAP. As soon as I tried to move. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. X said, "Please stay where you are." He seemed emotional. He seemed kind of frantic. And it was a mix between anxious, impulsive and kind of confident. He asked, "Can I borrow one of your phones?" My ex and I both said that we don't have our phones. I said that I hadn't paid my bill, so mine isn't functional. He said while almost tearing up, "You expect me to believe both of you don't have a phone?" This is the type of crap I'm talking about. I hate being lied to. Then he really started breaking down. He said I just did the most up thing. You don't know what I've just been through. We honestly thought that he was on drugs or something. But he started crying and he's like, "I just had to kill my own best friend. My brother." Then he said, "I'm going to ask again, do you have a phone?" I said that I had a phone, but it's not working. Which was the truth, because I paid my bill late. He was like, "Don't make me do this. And I really don't want to." Then he reaches for his backpack, and that's when both me and my ex realized that this might be our last day on Earth. But X said one thing that sparked something in my ex, and he said, "I'm a person. God's never going to forgive me." My ex wasn't religious, but he came from a Catholic family. He started talking, trying to calm this guy down. It was almost like a hostage negotiation or something. And my ex was like, "Remember God? Man, you can always repent and be forgiven. God will forgive you." And this guy just started crying and dropped to his knees and dropped his B. I took this chance to run to the passenger side, get in the driver's seat, reverse and flung the passenger door open for my ex, and we just drove off as fast as we could on the way home. We were obviously shaken, kind of in disbelief. I called the police and explained the situation. The police called up to us and asked us for his description, and they said that he just received a call about someone with a similar description, but didn't tell us the reason to this day. I'm really not sure if he was actually telling the truth or if he was on drugs or what was in his bag. My life definitely flashed for a moment, But we searched the news every day for a month for a similar incident, and we didn't find one about a man shot and injured in that area on the exact same date as the incident. So we can never really be sure, I suppose. And I guess I never really want to find out. Anyway, this story takes place during the summer when I was 15. It's a true story about a small encounter that I had. So I was living with my dad and my stepmother at the time. I remember my stepmother throwing a royal fit about buying me new school clothes because I'd let a few pairs of pants get holes in them and still wore them. It was my first year of going into high school, and I wasn't about to let her spoil that for me. So I went to stay with my grandparents for the summer to earn some money. They live in a remote small area that was once home to Native American tribes. It's very secluded, despite being a mile or so from the highway, and it's all lush, gorgeous forest. My grandpa had built his own 3-story house there too, and my shop as well, where he cut and assembled cedar into roofing products. And that was where I came in hauling heavy chunks of cedar to his van, stacking, nailing, cinching up, shaking shingle into bundles to be sold. And I made good money while there and was able to buy pretty much an entire new wardrobe. In fact. But as summer was coming to an end and it was just too hot to work, I decided to take a walk one day now. Let me say that I spent my childhood roaming these woods, armed with my grandparents, 2 dogs, and we ran and played and napped all day. And I had never seen anything out of the ordinary or gotten any sort of weird vibes. But I waited until it was a bit cooler in the evening, and I started out walking a little path that would take me to an old and used logging road. And I tread this same path so many times that I wasn't even paying attention until I just all of a sudden felt like I was being watched. I would like to note here that I was young at the time. I had yet to touch any drugs or alcohol, and I had no history of hallucination or mental illness or anything along those lines. But what I saw, it still haunts me to this day, because there he was standing naked in the middle of my path, looking down at me with a blank expression. He was tall, maybe 7 ft, much taller than my 5'0". He had long, matted black and gray hair, and there were tufts of it growing from the sides of his arms and legs as well. There were no genitals, only smooth flesh, where they should be, and his skin. It was such a sickly pale yellow and looked to be just too big for stature and hung in some spots. We made eye contact and his yellow orbs felt like they were staring right into my soul. I couldn't move or think, and everything had gone silent around me, and the next 10 or so seconds of my life just seemed to really stretch out. But we just stood there looking at one another for he swiftly turned and just walked back into the trees. But the foliage went undisturbed as he kind of melted through it and disappeared. I honestly expected him to charge at me, or at least be intimidating, but he just turned and left, and I haven't seen him since either. Nor am I too enthusiastic to go out looking, that's for sure. I remember telling my grandma about it, but she told me that it was probably just some drug addict, as the area that she lives in has a very high number of users and manufacturers of methamphetamines. I've told this story in a thread somewhere before, but I've never really gone out of my way to share it, particularly because I know it sounds a bit made up. I've tried looking into Native American folklore, especially the local stuff, but I haven't found anything matching that description. If you actually listen to this all the way through, this happened when I was in the 1st or 2nd year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Thank you. I appreciate the thought that somebody else out there knows about it now. And if you have any ideas about what this particular thing might have been, please let me know, because I would love to hear your thoughts. I really can't find a reasonable explanation for what happened that night. It was just a strange and really alarming experience. It all happened a few months ago. My friend had heard that the northern lights might be visible in our area and asked if I wanted to go for a drive into the country to see if we could catch a glimpse. So we headed out after dark and we drove for a few hours, just searching for a good vantage point, basically. But after a while we started to give up on seeing the lights. My friend realized. This happened when I was in the 1st or 2nd year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. But we were close to her hometown, and noted that she'd been waiting to visit the local cemetery to find the graves of some of her distant relatives. She had recently been researching in genealogy and whatnot. It was a clear and warm night, and we were both a little bit disappointed that we hadn't seen the lights yet. We both wanted to make the trip worthwhile, so we agreed to swing by the cemetery. But we found the graves, took some photos, and just wandered around for a little bit. My friend was leading the way, using the flashlight on her phone to light the path and ensure that we didn't accidentally step on any of the graves. I'd been feeling increasingly anxious since we arrived, which struck me as odd. I've done several cemetery projects as an archaeologist and don't normally feel nervous in cemeteries, even at night. In fact, I usually find that cemeteries are pretty peaceful and calming. But I just felt really strange in that cemetery and found myself frequently spinning around because I just felt like someone was standing behind me still. I just chalked it up to general anxiety and tried to not dwell on it. One of the many problems with having anxiety disorder is that it's sometimes hard to tell when your nervousness is justified, even in retrospect. I don't know if my anxiety was just in my head or if it was related to what would happen next, but after wondering for a while, we realized that it was approaching one's zero and that we should probably get back home. We headed toward the car. The car was in sight and my friend was a few yards ahead of me when it happened. I just suddenly got that nervous feeling again and thought that I had heard someone running up behind me. I was starting to turn my head to look back when I felt something collide with my back right between my shoulder blades. There was a weight behind it, as if someone had actually hurtled it into me. The impact was so forceful that I was thrown forward and fell flat on my face, and as I scrambled to get back up, I felt the weight hitting me in the shoulders again and was shoved back down. I glanced up to see my friend running toward me, as she had also heard someone running up to us. I heard my initial fall and had turned just in time to see me being pushed back down. She would later tell me that she had seen my hoodie flattening against my back and shifting as if someone had been pressing their hands against my shoulders. She grabbed my arm to pull me up just as the weight disappeared, and we both just bolted for the car, jumping in and instinctively locking all the doors. She wasted no time starting the engine and then hastily just peeling out of the driveway. And as soon as we hit the road, we just sped away from that. We drove several minutes, just kind of not saying a word. I think we were both just kind of stunned and, more than anything, really confused. She finally glanced at me and said, "What the hell just happened?" And I didn't know quite how to answer that. I told her that someone had shoved me to the ground and she said, "I know I saw. But what was that?" There was nothing there. We tried to come up with some sort of a rational explanation, but none of them made any sense. Had someone ambushed me and then bolted? And definitely not. But we would have seen them for sure had tripped. No, I definitely felt something pushing me, and my friend had seen me being shoved back down as well. Had it been the wind? Not possible. There hadn't been so much as a breeze that night. Perhaps an animal had attacked me, but that didn't seem possible either. I mean, there were no local animals large enough, strong enough and stealthy enough to topple a full-grown human without being seen like that. Plus, I had been in full view of my friend, illuminated by a flashlight light during the second fall, and the weight had remained on my shoulders, even as she was coming right up to me. She should have been able to see whatever had been pushing me, but there was just nothing there. In the end, we just couldn't explain it. But whatever had pushed me it hadn't been visible to us. As the adrenaline faded, I noticed something else as well. My back really hurt right between my shoulder blades, right where I had felt the impact. I could feel a sort of stinging or prickling sensation. It felt like my back had been brushed with stinging nettles. I mentioned this to my friend and she insisted on pulling over to look at my back. She switched the hood light on and pulled the collar of my hoodie down to take a look, and I heard her mutter, "What the hell?" The skin between my shoulder blades was rain red and several little blisters had started to appear as well. But they later swelled up and popped, and it was as if I'd gotten sunburn or chemical burn. There weren't any scratches or cuts. It was a relatively subtle mark, but it was still clearly there, and we certainly couldn't figure out how I gotten burned like that. I hadn't rubbed up against anything. I hadn't touched my back. I'd been wearing my hoodie all night and there were no tears or marks in the fabric. And man, did it hurt. It continued to stink for several days. In fact, and it was a really uncomfortable. In fact, I couldn't even sleep that night. My back hurt, and every time I started to drift off, I'd suddenly sense that someone was standing over my shoulder, and I would start awake. I couldn't really understand what happened at the cemetery, but it truly rattled me. I don't know if I believe in things like ghosts or demons, to be honest, but I know that something truly bizarre and frightening happened that night, and my inability to explain it, to account for every strange little detail, was deeply disturbing to me. It's been really difficult to grapple with this. I mean, I already have PTSD from a previous assault, and there is something profoundly unsettling about the fact that, in this instance, there's nothing that I could have done to defend myself, and with no clear explanation for it. There's no way for me to prevent something like this from happening again. I've had several nightmares since then as well, dreams that are similar to the nightmares that I'd had for years when I was growing up. I don't know where they came from, but for as long as I can remember, I've had dreams in which a creature is attempting to lure me in one way or another, and in the dreams I usually understand this creature to be a devil or a demon. Sometimes it takes the form of an old woman. I had a dream when I was about 13 years old, in which I was wandering through a forest and I came across a little cottage with this old woman standing by the porch. She beckoned me inside and I acquiesced, and we spent some time casually talking and baking cookies. But I just felt uneasy around her and got the sense that she wanted something from me. At one point I glanced out the window and I noticed a group of people just standing in the yard calling out to the old woman. I asked who these people were, and I vividly remember what she told me. They want me to take them in, but I don't want them. I want you. In other dreams it's had a more sinister appearance, but I always recognize it as the same creature. I sometimes have dreams in which it's sitting in the dark at my bedside whispering to me. It has a shadowy appearance, with long length limbs and empty eye sockets. Its teeth are made of razor, wire or something, and there's something like blood or wine gleaming on its lips. In those dreams I can hear it whispering, but I can't exactly understand what it's saying. Sometimes I have dreams of the same creature sitting in a chair in the corner of my room eating a rotten apple. I have long suspected that this creature is some sort of a manifestation of my deepest and most troubling fears. I know that these are just dreams, but I mention it because those dreams have subsided in my early 20s. But the incident at the cemetery rattled me so much that they've kind of returned. This whole experience seems to have shaken my understanding of the world around me, opening the floodgates to my own inner demons in these new dreams. The creature is standing upright behind me at the cemetery. Time seems to be slowing down. I can see my friend frozen ahead of me, and the creature is whispering at my back. I really don't know why my mind is conflating that dream creature with my encounter at the cemetery, but the fear has increasingly kept me up at night. Anyway, I just wanted to share this because I have no idea what the hell happened that night. My friend believes that it was a ghost, but I don't know. I've just never personally experienced anything like this, and I really don't know what to do about it. But thanks for listening, and hopefully soon I can figure this out. My dad told me about this incident that happened in the early 50s when he was a young child. I'm sharing it here with how it was relayed to me. So it was in the early 50s. My dad couldn't have been much older than 5 or 6 years old when it happened. He grew up on a large family farm that was fairly isolated. The nearest neighborhood was at least a quarter-mile away through rolling wooded hills. There was no electric service on the farm back then, and they didn't get phones until the summer of 1984, so they were effectively on their own. One day Grandpa had sent my uncle to the feed mill to collect payment for that year's harvest. He was told to get it in cash. Grandpa wanted to pay the year's taxes and then deposit the rest in the bank. My uncle brought the money home that night. At around 2 a.m., they were awakened by a car parked on the property with its headlights aimed at the house. Grandpa rolled out of bed and crawled along the floor to my uncle and dad's bedroom and woke my uncle up in almost complete darkness. They ran down the stairs. My uncle ran out the back door and Grandpa ran out of the front. Grandpa threw the front door open and ran outside so fast that he pretty much leapt over the back steps and went to confront the guy. The driver of the car was already most of the way to the house. He saw Grandpa coming with my uncle close behind and he turned and hauled us. And Grandpa wasn't far behind. He made it to his car and he was trying to drive away and Grandpa was grabbing the steering wheel trying to stop him. But eventually he managed to break loose and Grandpa chased him a short distance down the road. But he finally got away. At that point Grandpa and my uncle noticed a second car at the end of the block speeding away as well. The intruders had managed to get away that night, but thankfully no one was hurt. The next day, Grandpa and my uncle reported what had happened to the sheriff, and the sheriff pretty much succinctly told them to buy some rifles, because if it happens again, do what you have to do to defend yourselves. And the next stop they made was to the hardware store to buy said rifles, one for each of my uncles and one for my grandpa. There was never a repeat of the incident, as far as my dad knows, and the late-night visitors were never caught. This happened a few years ago when I was still living with my mom and I had borrowed a car to go see my boyfriend for the evening. It was around midnight when I got back to my neighborhood, so the roads were pretty much empty. And that's when I noticed this dirty, run-down, rusted white utility van that my maintenance guy would drive following me. I never saw the driver's face, but I got this immediate sinking feeling in my stomach because something just felt wrong about this van. Now I was only 20 at the time, but I knew better than to just drive straight to my house and letting this person know exactly where I live, no matter how desperately I wanted to just go home and ignore it. But I also wasn't 100% sure that they were actually following me yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions just because it was late and I was alone and being paranoid and all that. So I drove to a shopping complex a few minutes out of the way that's well lit and has a public library to see if I was followed there. I thought that I lost the van but decided to wait in the parking lot for a few minutes because I just had a bad feeling that I just couldn't shake. Sure enough, the van showed up and was driving in just random circles around the parking lot looking for me by the looks of things. That scared me quite a bit, so I drove towards the big mall. Here that's always got security or police presence, because it was the midway point between where I was and where I lived at. I parked in a very well lit, although empty, 24-hour McDonald's parking lot, where I had a great view of the roads and the mall. But I wasn't super easy to spot as well and I just waited to see if the man showed up looking for me. And it did. And of course this would be the one time security and the cops nowhere to be found, which was half the reason I decided to head there in the first place. Realizing that whoever was driving this van was 100% actively following me in the middle of the night. I knew that driving home was not an option, and that's a terrifying realization. Luckily, the police station is just a few minutes away from where I was, so I try and discreetly drive away, hoping the van hasn't noticed me yet. I wasn't that lucky because it wasn't long before the van was back in my rearview mirror. At this point I'm panicking pretty hard and my anxiety is really high. I finally pulled into the police station parking lot and seconds later the van came to a stop in the middle of the road for no more than a few seconds, I'm guessing just long enough for them to realize where I led them. And they just took off immediately. Pretty quickly as well. I did make it home safe and without seeing the van again not long after. But this whole ordeal took up at least an hour of my night. It was after 1:00 a.m. by the time that I made it home and I was pretty much terrified the whole night. I don't know what this guy's specific intention was, but honestly, I don't need to know. I know that it was nothing good and that I likely avoided a very bad situation. If you think that someone is following you, it's not stupid or paranoid to make sure that you are right, because who knows what might have happened if I had led them to my house or gotten out of my car. So me and my friend Jacob go out biking in a forest near my house because it's pretty big and it has some nice trails. We'd been biking around for I'd say about an hour when we realized that we were actually kind of lost, so we stopped to try and figure out where we were at. He was trying to map up on his phone. When I noticed a house not too far off the trail, My friend's phone wasn't having any luck with connecting, so we decided to walk over to the house to check if someone could point us in the right direction. We knocked on the door, and honestly, just like a horror movie, and I know that's cliché, but this is exactly what happened. The door just creaked open by itself. Well, this way. We walked in asking if anyone was there, and then we realized that the place was empty. It was mostly furnished, but it looked pretty old and the fridge was rancid. My friend finds a staircase leading up to a floor, and we decided to go up and check that part of the place out. The second that I put my foot on that staircase, I felt just nauseous. I almost fell over because of just how bad I felt, in fact, and my friend helps me make it out of the place. But I see OL laps outside on the ground and I start vomiting just violently. My friend is trying to help me from falling into my vomit, and once I was done I sat back up and I just tried to get some air. And that was when my friend turned around and just mumbled, "Holy crap, dude." I turned around at this and the entire house was gone, like it wasn't even dirt and stuff. That proved the house even existed. I mean, it looked like the house was never even there in the first place. There was even a tree growing in a spot where the corner of the place was. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there just staring at the ground. That was when I realized that I'd taken a picture of the place in my phones, so I pulled that out, trying to see if I'd actually taken a picture or not, and it was just a picture of the ground just covered in dead leaves and grass. We decided that moving was better than staying there, and after probably half an hour or so we found our way back to the trails that we knew. I've got no idea what the hell that was, but I'm wondering, has anyone else seen anything like this? I can't be the only one, right? If you guys have had any similar experiences or know of any similar stories, I would love to hear them, so please let me know in the comments section below. Oh, and I actually returned there not so long ago trying to get some pictures for you guys, but after what happened when we tried going back to find the spot, I honestly just don't think that it's worth the risk anymore. This is because we went into the forest at maybe 11 or 11:20 a.m. We looked about for what could have only been about an hour's tops, and we left because we were starting to get hungry. He turns on his car and we both immediately noticed that the time read 5:00 p.m. which means that we were in there for roughly 6 hours, and yet we barely felt it. So since then, me and my friend have pretty much agreed to forget it ever happened. In the first place, and just street clear of that forest entirely at age 14, my parents sent me to a military school in Virginia for pretty much bad behavior. Cadets stayed at the school throughout the school year, except for a few weekends and holiday leaves and whatnot. The school opened in 1898 and many buildings on the campus had been around for well over 100 years, like the barracks that I slept in. Though several buildings throughout the years had burned down, like one such occurrence when an accidental fire burned down the Delta Company barracks in 1924. But the academic building was built around 1915. It was 2 stories tall, with the second floor being full of classrooms. But my experience took place on the first floor, which featured a handful of offices for facility offices, a computer lab as well, and a large room that had 2 large swinging doors. It opened into a study hall meant to accommodate roughly 75 students at any given time. But one aspect of my new life as a cadet was called guard duty, and every day 3 cadets were randomly selected to be on guard duty. The guards had to wake up an hour earlier than everyone else at 5:00, and he'd wake up, get dressed in uniform, and meet the other 2 guards at the academic hall. Once the guards got to the building, they were supposed to do a walk-through on both floors to make sure nothing was out of place and just check that nobody was inside. After the walk-through, you'd sit by the phone in the first floor hallway and take calls from anyone happening to call in. So I had been at the boarding school for a few months when I was assigned my first guard duty. So the next morning I woke up early and I got dressed as quietly as possible to avoid waking my roommates. It was pouring outside, so I put on my rain jacket on top of my uniform and walked through the dark to the academic building. Usually guards would meet up outside the building, but since it was raining hard, I just decided to go inside by myself. I waited inside the dark building for the other guys to show up, and after about 10 minutes I started to get worried because they still had not shown up, and I was concerned that a facility officer might come early and see that I had not done my job. So I walked up the stairs and checked every classroom and also the creepy bathroom that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1940s, and nothing was out of place. So I made my way downstairs to check the offices, the study hall and other rooms. I thoroughly opened every door and walked through every room. Once again, nothing was out of place and no one was inside. In fact, everything seemed pretty much in order in the dark building, and so I sat down in the hallway next to the phone. But after a few minutes I felt the weirdest sensation. The building had begun to kind of shake softly. I could feel the vibrations in my body and see the small table next to me shake ever so much. I sat there completely frightened by whatever was occurring in front of my eyes. But the rumbling abruptly stopped a few moments later and I took a big sigh of relief. But then I started hearing noises from the study hall room, the doors to which were only 10 feet away from me. It started off just barely legible and I couldn't tell what I was hearing from that room, though it seemed like it was getting louder, and soon I started to hear what sounded like whispering. It kept getting louder and louder until I could hear what sounded like dozens and dozens of voices inside the room, and after a few moments I could actually hear what they were saying. But it was as if many conversations were taking place all at once, in a kind of chaotic sense, that I could hear laughter and comments like "pass me the answers to the math, homework" and stuff like that. This was a room that I'd just been in a short while ago and there was no other entrance into it other than the swinging doors. But I was sitting right next to it had been completely empty, short of all the desks and items throughout the room. But now I was hearing what I can only describe as a room full of voices. I sat there paralyzed with fear while hearing all of this, and then I began to also hear a tapping noise coming from around the room. It sounded almost as if someone was hitting a ruler against a desk. The tapping sound began to move around the room while all the other voices continued when suddenly the tapping stopped. But what was so much worse was that I heard something scream, "Sit down and shut up, it's study time." It was incredibly loud and unmistakably like an instructor was in there screaming at a room full of cadets. As soon as whoever or whatever finished screaming, the study hall fell completely silent. I sat in my chair wanting to bolt out of the building, but I was honestly just too scared to move. Plus I'd have to pass by the doorway to the study hall and actually get out of the building. But my heart was pounding in my chest and I was breathing incredibly hard. I was terrified that whatever was in that room would realize that I was there, and then the building softly began to shake again, almost as if whatever was taking place was coming to an end. A few minutes passed as I sat there in my chair in silence. I couldn't hear anything anymore coming from the study hall and I began to feel slightly better about the circumstances. No, I still had not built up the nerve to actually make a run for it yet. But then building started to shake again, and I could hear the ruler tapping noise start up again in the room. And this time it was clear that it was making its way to the door that led to me. It was moving fast and growing louder. It had almost gotten to the swinging doors when I sprang up without thinking and my survival instincts kicked in. And I sprinted out of the building as fast as I had ever run before. Now outside, I made my way through the dark back to my barracks, and just as I was getting near the barracks, one of the guards was sleepily walking out of the barracks and the other students were all still fast asleep. I calmed my nerves and I walked up to him. He hadn't seen me running in the rain yet, and for some reason I didn't tell him what I had experienced. I walked with him back to the academic building as he explained how he had overslept, and we walked inside. He made a bean to the study hall room open the swinging doors, walked in and tossed his backpack onto his assigned desk. I followed him inside apprehensively, and when I got in, the room was still empty. So, to start off, this is a collection of stories from my old house that I lived in my entire life up until 3 years ago. There was a lot that happened to me and my family in the house, but these are the ones that I could think of off the top of my head. So before I begin, let me explain how my bedroom is set up and give some backstory of my family. My parents used to be paranormal investigators and were part of a ghost hunting team in Arizona. They had many cases but actually stopped when they dealt with something so bad that it really messed them up. And so the paranormal really isn't anything new to us. Growing up, I believed in ghosts because of what I'd seen and learned. But now that I'm an adult, I'm sort of skeptical about everything. Though I've had a lot of stuff happen to me that I really can't explain logically. So yeah, this is one of those stories to explain. My house, my bedroom, was upstairs. Attached to my bedroom was a Jack and Jill bathroom connected to my sister's bedroom. Both doors locked from inside of the bathroom, and one night my younger sister and I was sitting in my bedroom. I had a bunk bed set up so the bottom was a desk and I would sleep at the top at this time. I was on the top bunk just playing on my phone, and my little sister was at the desk drawing. At some point, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. We started to hear the bathroom door not move as if someone was trying to open it, but it couldn't because it was locked. I told my little sister to go and open it because whoever was on the other side was stupid, because it locks from that side. She goes over and tells me that the door is locked, and before she got over to the door, it just stopped moving. We just kind of shrugged it off, thinking that it might have been our older sister messing with us, and we went back to doing whatever it was that we were doing. After a while, we decided to head back downstairs. I turn off my lights and I come down off my bunk bed. We started heading down the hallway and I could hear my parents fighting. And so I told my little sister that I'd join her down there in a minute because, to be honest, I didn't want to deal with my parents. So I went over to my older sister's bedroom, assuming she was in there, because all of the lights were on from what I could see under a doorway. As I approached the door, I started to hear what sounded like a scrubbing noise. Honestly, the best way I could describe it is like someone was going to town on deep cleaning my bathtub. I thought it was weird, since my sister literally doesn't clean anything, especially not our bathtub. I originally went to open a door and it was locked, so I knocked on the door and waited and nothing. I then banged on the door thinking that she probably just couldn't hear me because of the loud noise coming from the bathroom, and I shouted, "Can open up? Why are you scrubbing something at like 8 p.m.? And I again heard no reply. After a few more bangs in the door, I started to get annoyed. That's when the scrubbing sound stopped, thinking that she was finally coming. I waited by the door when suddenly the door just started shaking as if someone on the other side was scratching at it with both hands, and it was the same noise that I could hear in the bathroom. I could tell that it was shaking too, because I could see the light peeking through the openings every time the door was hit. At first I assumed maybe one of the dogs got locked in there on accident, but then I thought my sister was probably just messing with me. So I banged on the door and yelled something like, "Stop messing around and let me in." The noise continued for maybe a second, and it's when I banged on the door once more and suddenly everything just stopped. A few seconds of silence and there was a loud bang on the door. In response, I thought at this point, okay, screw this, and slowly backed away. I yelled to my mom, who was downstairs, and said, "Mom, is Kin in her room?" And she replied, "No, she's in the garage with the chickens." We had moved our chickens to the garage because it was too cold out for them, and we felt that chicken seed just wasn't good enough to keep them warm. I then ran downstairs as fast as I could and asked, "Are you sure?" And she said, "I don't know. Go look." So I did. I opened the door and there she was sitting on the couch with one of our chickens. I then explained to her everything that happened, and she was just as confused as me. So we decided to head up together to check it out. I told her the door was locked, so she was going to push it open. Her door kind of sucked, so with enough force she could open it even when locked. She went to push her door open and nearly fell into the room, because suddenly her door was just unlocked again. All her lights were in the closet and the bathroom door was wide open. We kind of just stood there for a moment and wondered what the hell happened. And at that moment we heard the scraping noise in the bathroom, and we both just ran out and downstairs so fast that my sister slipped and ran into the table because my mom was mopping. So in the end, we're not really sure what had happened, but it never happened again. After that, the next story to give some backstory again, and you can believe it or not, but my sister has always been sensitive to the paranormal, ever since she was a baby in fact. Because growing up she'd tell my parents that she had a family friend who passed away, or she would play with our great-grandma, Jessie, who passed away when we were babies. Even as a teenager, she would tell us about figures that she would see and stuff like that. And anyway, the story goes like this. My sister comes into my room at night at about 30 minutes after I took a shower. She come in to yell at me. All my lights were off. So she comes in, yells at me and goes back into her room. And she had heard me laughing from downstairs and yelled down the stairs for me. I replied and she asked me how long I'd been down there. And I told her about 30 minutes and then asked why. She just went silent and said never mind. But I knew that something was up. She didn't tell me for a few days, even though I kept pressing her about it. And eventually she told me that when she came into my room to yell at me, she saw a figure, clear as day, laying on my bunk bed. The figure even turned around to look at her as if it was looking over its shoulder while laying on its side. She told me that she didn't want to freak me out, because I told her that sometimes when I sleep on my bed, I feel like there's something there with me on the top bunk. And after that I had sleeping problems and it really creeped me out. I hated that room and I hated sleeping in that room. And it just gave me a bad vibe every time I would go in there. And so that really just turned me off from wanting to sleep in there. I 100% believe my sister too, because of the fact that she was so freaked out she didn't tell me for a few days. I had a lot of things happen to me in this house, and I'm really glad that I don't live there anymore now. The next one is a little bit stupid, but it was a big deal to me at the time and I think it adds to the context. So the story starts like this. When I was around 16 or 17, I had a bedroom, and in my bedroom was a dresser, my bunk bed, closet and bathroom. And I had a bunch of tacks sitting on my dresser and the plastic case that I came in. At one time I walked into my bedroom about to head into my bathroom, and the TXS were just all over the floor. I was like, damn it, to knock this onto the floor again, and then didn't bother to pick it up. I went to my sister's room. Our bedrooms were connected with the Jack and Jill bathroom, remember? And I thought that maybe she knocked it over while going into her bedroom, since my dresser was right next to my bathroom. So I went in and I asked her, and she said that she hadn't gone into my room all day. I was like, whatever. She's lying, because I sure didn't knock it over. But a few days pass and the same thing happens again. A few days later and the same thing. I come in and the tacks are just all over my floor. Again. Annoyed, I picked them up and put them into a little glass box that I had so that they wouldn't fall off my dresser again. The next day I come in and my tacks are on the floor again. I was starting to get pissed off at this point because it just kept happening, and I thought someone was messing with me. I asked my sister and she swore that it wasn't her. I asked my mom and my dad, and neither of them knew that I even had text in there. So I put them back in the glass box and pushed them to the end of my dresser against the mirror. But as you've probably ascertained by now, it just kept happening. At first it was every few days, but then it was like once a day, and eventually it happened twice a day. My whole family knew about it too, because I just complained about it so much. We jokingly named it the TAC ghost, and I've called it that ever since. Eventually I kind of got used to it. So when I'd come in, I'd sort of just sigh and outwardly say, "Are you kidding me again? Don't you have something better to do?" My family kind of made fun of it and didn't really believe me too much, and I was getting pretty mad and I wanted to test something. So I put my tacks into the glass box once more and I placed a candle on top of it. The next day I came home from school and guess what? Tacks are all over my bedroom floor. Not just in a pile in front of my dresser. And the damn candle is straight across the room with the lid off. I kind of freaked out over this and I told everyone and they were like, well, then take them out of the room. But I was determined to prove to them that I wasn't just making it up. So Christmas comes around and I had a friend who was living with us at the time and told him that we were going to test this stuff out, so he would see that I wasn't lying. After opening presents and cards, I bring all my stuff upstairs and he comes with me. I place some of the heavier items on my dresser and I put my cards and money on top of the pile. I outwardly said, "Don't touch my money" to the ghost. And then I looked at my friend and I said, we'll come back later and see if anything happens. A few hours pass and we go upstairs to check and nothing had happened. After a little while I honestly thought that maybe nothing was going to actually happen until my friend and I go upstairs to check and my money is across the room on the floor. More scares ahead. Subscribe today.